Now in Treasure Chest, as you know, you have the first 5 chapters from short stories. Bonku Babu's Friend, Oliver Asks for More, The Model Millionaire, The Homecoming, and The Boy Who Broke the Bank. So chapter 2 is a very short chapter. Oliver Asks for More. Now before we begin, please note a few things, like make a mental note. This is not a complete short story. It is an extract or an excerpt. Okay, excerpt means a part of a big story or a novel. In this case, the name of the original novel is Oliver Twist. That is the full name of the character, Oliver Twist. It is written by the prominent, one of the most popular English writers, Charles Dickens. Okay, Charles Dickens belonged to which century? You belong to which century?
I belong to the 21st century.
22nd century. Right now, sorry, 21st century. Yes. Charles Dickens belonged to 19th century. 1800s है. उनका I told you ना, अगर वो 1873 या 18 उनका जो birth और death year है, his birth year, 1 second, Google है, Google में जो लिखो Charles Dickens birth and death. Just is it written there? So 1812, turn to page number 83. Rishi turn to page number 83. It is mentioned there. It is 1812 to 1870. कितना साल जिया हो calculate करो, 58 years. 57, 58. So as you can see, the entire part of his lifespan is in 1800s. So basically he lived in the 19th century. Okay, and you can say उनका जो main जो productive years था, that was mid 19th century. Okay, 19th century का 3 parts होता है, early, mid और late. For example, right now you are in your early 21st century. So your entire academic career or academic life, पढ़ने का or growth का, that will be in the first half of or the early part of 21st century. Okay, your professional life and matrimonial life, family life will basically be in the middle of the 21st century, isn't it? 1930, 40, wala part 50. Okay, so Charles Dickens was born in 1812. So because he was born in 1812, we can assume that he started writing after say 20 years, which means 1830, 1835. Okay, so 1830s, say you can count his professional life, which basically lasted till his death in 1870. So Charles Dickens was a 19th century writer. Okay, mid 19th century. Now please note, mid 19th century, you don't have to write, like just mentally note. Mid 19th century was largely characterized by what we call industrial revolution in Europe. Okay, so in Europe, industrial revolution had come into force. Now, what is the meaning of industrial revolution? In short, it basically means that more and more industries were becoming mechanized. Understood? Which means with the introduction of machines in the factories, the producers, who are called the owners, basically, the capitalist class, okay, or the owners, they now did not need workers to that extent. समझ गए? If I have machine, then my dependence on a human labor will come down. समझ गए मैं क्या बोलना चाह रहे हैं? My dependence on human labor will come down, which means that I can exploit the human workers and I can tell them तुम्हें काम करना है तो करो इस तनख्वाह में, वरना तुम निकल जाओ, मुझे तुम्हारी जरूरत नहीं है, तुम्हें मेरी जरूरत है. So this misbalance Okay, this sort of lack of balance that came. Workers were more dependent on the landlords or the factory lords. But the capitalist class was not that much dependent on the labor class. Okay, because they had machines as a backup. So this entire era is marked by social inequality. Social inequality, where the upper class or the capitalist class would exploit the labor class. Clear? So workers, and mazdoor log, the laborers, they began to live in extremely miserable and in an increasingly poor condition. The rich became richer and the poor became poorer. Okay. The rich became richer and richer and richer. The poor became poorer and poorer and poorer. So the gulf or the divide between them increased. Clear? The gulf or the divide between the two classes increased. Charles Dickens, who himself went through a troublesome childhood. The author Charles Dickens himself, who went through a troublesome childhood, he has presented a bit of his own self in the story. Clear? Which means that when you read Oliver Twist or you read this chapter, it is partly autobiographical, which means that author has borrowed from his own experiences and memories as he has woven a story about Oliver Twist and how he undergoes a life of difficulty and hardship, especially as a child. So we find that Oliver Twist is an orphan. When he is born, just after he is born, his mother dies. So he becomes an orphan. He does not have a father. He becomes an orphan. He eventually is growing up in a workhouse. So workhouse is basically a kind of a place. It is not exactly an orphanage. It is a kind of a place where there are orphaned children and they are made to do small little work. And the authorities, they do not give them a fair life. They give them very little food and they treat them very harshly. So Oliver Twist has to receive very harsh treatment. Okay. So now let us begin the story and find out. Page number 83. Charles Dickens, 1812 to 1870, was an English writer and social critic. He is regarded by many as the greatest novelist of the Victorian era. So Victorian era is basically the first half of 19th century. So like I said, that he mainly produced his work in the first half of 19th century. So he is one of the main authors of Victorian era. Underline Victorian era, this may come for MCQ. So if I ask you that he belonged to which era, your answer will be Victorian era. That is a century and the era is Victorian era. Oliver asks for more. The orphan Oliver and his companions were ill-treated. So they were badly treated and starved in the workhouse. One day, a tall boy announced, so the tall boy is the friend or the companion of Oliver Twist, that he would eat the boy who slept next to him unless he was given extra gruel. Gruel is food, meal. A council was held. Council means meeting, meeting of the authorities. So a council or the meeting of the authorities was held, and it was decided that Oliver should ask the master Master is basically the उस workhouse का caretaker for more food, for more gruel. I think gruel उसको बोलते हैं, दलिया को बोलते हैं. I think something like that. वही soup माने कौन सा soup? हम लोग in India soup we say soup means tomato soup or something, but gruel actually वो दलिया type का है. Understood? Gruel वही वैसा ही कुछ है. वो fruit juice soup नहीं है. It is वो corn का ही कुछ है. ऐसे ही कुछ होगा, something like that. कुछ rice वाइस का होगा, rice या wheat का. Oliver Twist was then bound into apprenticeship with an undertaker. I mean, this part is there in the extract, in this introduction, but ये यहाँ पे नहीं है, story में नहीं है. Now, what is the meaning of undertaker? Undertaker, third paragraph. I mean, what is the meaning of undertaker? Have you heard of undertaker?
Sir, can
Yes.
I say?
Say.
Sir, he makes coffins. The person who makes coffins.
I mean, undertaker is somebody who makes coffins, and usually when a funeral is held, you know what's funeral? When Christian bodies are buried. So yeah, undertaker का काम है कि वो ठीक से burial करे. That is why the WWE wrestler Undertaker, उसका real name Undertaker नहीं है. He has been given the name Undertaker because he has been given this kind of image कि जो उसे fight करेगा वो उसे bury कर देगा. So there have been some alive matches called buried alive match. Have you seen them? So actually that is why the name Undertaker, because Undertaker is normally connected to death. You call an undertaker when somebody has died in the family. समझ गए? तो Undertaker का services तभी मिलता है when the funeral has to be held. So here we find towards the end that Oliver Twist will eventually be taken away by an undertaker, and Oliver Twist will become his apprentice. Apprentice मतलब like शिष्य, like जो उसके अंदर अंडर सीख रहा है. Oliver Twist, the novel, exposes the cruel treatment of the many orphans in London in the mid-19th century, industrial age England. So this novel is an eye-opener. When you read this novel, you get to learn about the harsh way in which the orphans were treated in several places in London and other parts of Europe in the mid-19th century. This excerpt, which means extract, reflects Charles Dickens' own experiences and a difficult childhood. So this story is partly autobiographical. Understood? Charles Dickens has borrowed from his own experiences. Despite the evident pathos means like sadness, misery. The character of Oliver Twist is surrounded by, or he leads a life of pathos, something that can evoke pity. जब उसके बारे में देखोगे या सुनोगे, when you read about him, you feel a strong surge of pity towards him, that उसे खाना भी नहीं मिलता. So despite the evident pathos, Charles Dickens manages to infuse means insert or inject. Underline that. Inject, INJECT. Inject or infuse the central character. Who is the central character? Oliver Twist. With gentility. Now, gentility here means like, it means calmness and humbleness. अगर तुम्हें खाना ना दिया जाए, तो you can behave in two ways. One is तुम उत्पात मचा दोगे, समझे शौर्य? तुम उधम मचा दोगे, एक वो behavior है. और दूसरा है, even though he was treated harshly, he did not turn violent. He remained calm. So you find here that even though he was hit, he was beaten, still he, as he was growing up, he did not turn into a violent child. Clear? So his character is a character of a calm boy. So gentility is actually calmness and humbleness, and empathy. Empathy means one who understands others' pain. Empathy is a very similar word to sympathy, but it actually means when you understand somebody else's pain. So as Oliver Twist grew up, he could empathize with other people. कि मैं तुम्हारा दुख दर्द समझता हूं. Like he would become a helpful person. He would help other poor people, or he would help other fellow students or his fellow companions. Okay. Turn to page number 84. Bhavika, read loudly.
Among other buildings in a town in England, there was a house for poor people who had no money and nowhere to live. This was called the workhouse. Oliver Twist was born in a workhouse. His mother, a young woman, lay in bed. A doctor and an old woman stood by her side. She lifted her head from the pillow. "Let me see the child and die," she said. "Oh, you mustn't talk about dying yet," said the doctor. "No, dear," said the old woman. "You're too young to die." The young woman shook her head and held out her hand towards the child. The doctor put the child in her arms. She pressed her whole white lips to its face and then fell back. "She is dead," said the doctor.
Okay, stop. So what we find in this first half, among other buildings in a town in England. So there are many buildings in England. Some of them are very lavish. The rich man's house. So among all those buildings, there stood a building which was called the workhouse, where poor people dwelled. They were so poor, they had no money and they had nowhere else to live. So workhouse is basically a place where the homeless people live. They can be children, they can be young men also. Oliver Twist was born in a workhouse. So his birth was there, which means, which gives you a background story that his mother did not have a house. Isn't it? Oliver Twist was born in a workhouse, which automatically means that his mother did not have a house, nor could she afford to go to a medical center or a hospital. So she gave birth to Oliver Twist in a workhouse. His mother, a young woman, lay ill in bed. Now, like I said, that it is very, very vital to understand the background of the story. This story is not a modern day story. This story is set around 150 to 180 years back. Okay, which means in the 1800s. At that time, medical science was obviously not at all advanced. And the IMR, you know what is IMR? Infant mortality rate was very high. Okay, which means that if you give birth to 10 children, then out of 10, maybe 5 or 6 will die immediately after birth or in a few hours. Okay, today that doesn't happen because today the medical science is too advanced. So the child can be immediately protected from external threats like virus or bacteria. But in those days, that was not the case. So the likelihood of a mother or an infant dying was very high. Understood? Today, the mother gets such a strong medical care and treatment that she's out of the hospital in a matter of 2 days. But in those days, sometimes the child and sometimes the mother would die during childbirth. Okay. So here she is ill and she has just given birth to the child. A doctor and an old woman stood by her side. She lifted her head. She means Oliver's mother. Lifted her head from the pillow. "Let me see the child and die." Now, obviously, she wants to see the child one last time before she knows that she is about to die. oh, you mustn't talk about dying yet. The doctor said that be hopeful. No, dear, said the old woman. You are too young to die. So she is a very young woman. But the young woman shook her head and held out her hand. She held out her hand towards the child. The doctor put the child in her arms. She pressed her cold white lips to the face of the child. Means she kissed the child. Now her lips are cold because she is on the verge of death. Understood? Like blood का flow कम हो रहा है उसके body में. So she is no longer warm. She is turning cold. Okay, so her lips are not warm and healthy, but rather cold and pale. Because they are pale, that is why they are called white lips. Because color chala gaya lips में से. Understood? Like when you become sick, people say that तुम्हारा चेहरा पीला पड़ गया, but you have turned pale, which means color has drained out of your face. So here her blood circulation had slowed down, which means that her lips were turning cold and pale or white. So she kissed the child on his face and then fell back. So she collapsed and she died. Okay, she is dead, said the doctor. Ayan, read the next part, the entire page. Yes, poor dear.
Yes, poor dear.
Loudly.
Yes, poor dear, said the old woman, as she took the child away from its dead mother. Poor dear. She was a good-looking girl, said the doctor, as he put on his hat and gloves. Where did she come from? She was brought here last night, said the old woman. She was lying in the street. She had walked a long way, and her shoes had holes in them. Nobody knows where she came from or where she was going. The doctor raised the dead woman's left hand. The usual story, he said. I see that she has no ring on her finger. She wasn't married. Good night.
Good night. Okay, wait. So she is dead, said the doctor. Yes, poor dear, said the old woman. Now this old woman obviously is probably she works in that workhouse, but she is a kind old woman. Maybe she is the caretaker, she is the cook, but she's a kind person. And she took the child away from the dead mother. Poor dear. She was a good-looking girl, said the doctor, as he put on his hat and gloves. Why did the doctor put on his hat and gloves? Because he was about to leave. In European society, especially in old days, when people left their houses, they would put on a hat. Okay, they would put on a hat and a coat. So, like people who are gentlemen. And that was also the mark of a gentleman. If you're walking on road and you can see that some people are wearing a hat, which means that person is a gentleman. And some people are bareheaded, which means that person belongs to a lower class. Understood? So a hat also became a sort of a symbol of your class. So the doctor put on his hat and gloves. Where did she come from? The doctor asked, where did she come from? The old woman replied, she was brought here last night. She was lying in the street. So she was ill, she was homeless, she was lying in the street. Somebody just brought her last night. She had walked a long way. So maybe she had been walking and her shoes had holes in them. What does it mean? Her shoes had holes in them. It again tells us that she was not well off. She was penniless, poor and penniless, without any money. She was poor, she was homeless, and she was carrying a child. Okay. Nobody knows where she came from or where she was going to. Then the doctor raised the dead woman's left hand. The doctor just raised the left hand and dropped it just to check the pulse. And then the doctor said the usual story. I see. Actually, the doctor was checking the left hand to see if there is a ring or not. The doctor said that I see that she has no ring. Now, ring means the engagement or wedding ring. Okay. Now, again, in the Western countries, a ring is something very, very important, which means when a person is married, then that person almost always wears the ring on his or her left finger, left hand, third finger. That is a compulsion. Understood? It is not, it has to be done. And people look at the ring, and if they see that the ring is there, people take a guess that the person is married. So the doctor found that there was no ring, and the doctor declared that she has no ring on her finger, which means that she wasn't married. So she wasn't married, which means she had given birth to the boy without getting married. So you can see that she was a homeless and a helpless woman. Good night. And then the doctor walked out. Clear so far? So already you can see that the story is full of what you can call pathos or sadness. There is a general air of gloom, of sorrow in the story. Okay, the first page gives us a brief idea about Oliver Twist's mother. Even though brief, you can understand here that a man took advantage of her. A man, presumably from the upper class, took advantage of her and left her, did not marry her. So these things give you a brief idea about how the society at that time functioned. Clear? In England or London. Kohan, read the next two paragraphs, page 85, loudly.
He went home to his dinner. The old woman,
He means the doctor.
the old woman sat down on a chair in front of the fire and began to dress the baby. She dressed him in the very old clothes used for babies who were born in the workhouse. The child was an orphan born in a world which had no love or pity for him. No one was able to discover who the baby's father was or what his mother's name was. Mr. Bumble, an important officer in the town, invented a name for the baby. He chose the name Oliver Twist.
Read one more paragraph.
We named the new baby here in order from A to Z. He explained when people asked, I named the last one
Swabble.
Swabble. This one is Twist. The next one will be
Unwin.
Unwin.
Okay. So the doctor went home and the old woman, she tended to the baby. Okay. Dressed the baby in old clothes. And then the line in the first para, the last line, the child was an orphan, born into a world which had no love for him or no pity for him. So this line tells you quite directly that the child is an unwelcome child. He is not welcomed because the only two people who could have loved him are dead. Okay, his mother is dead and his father is not there, so he is as good as dead. Nobody else would love him because he is a poor child. He hasn't taken birth with a silver spoon in his mouth. He has been born and born a poor. Then obviously the general inquiry was made. They tried to discover the name of the baby's father or the mother, but they could not. So Mr. Bumble, who was an important officer in the town, and he was also one of the authorities of the church. So he invented a name for the baby and he gave him the name of Twist. Now in Western countries, the surname is more important than the name. Okay, they call the people by their surname. So he says that when new babies are born, we name them in the order from A to Z. So the last one I had named Swabble, means the surname was Swabble. Swabble begins with S. So after S, what is the next alphabet? P, Q, R, S, T, U. S, T, U, right? So S के बाद क्या आएगा? T आएगा. So he has therefore named the baby Twist, the surname. And the next name would be with U, Anwen. Surname. Because surnames are more important than names. Names are very common. Surname decides your character and your class, not name. If you go to London or Europe, out of 10, 5 children will have their name John. Okay. So name is not important. Surname is important. Clear? So he chose the name Oliver Twist. Okay, look at the next para then. Rishi, read the next para at the age of 9.
Okay, sir. At the age of 9, Oliver was a pale, thin child. He and the other workhouse boys never had enough warm clothes or food. They were given only 3 meals of thin soup every day. On Sundays, they had a small piece of bread. They were fed in a big hall. A large pot stood at one end of the room, and the soup was served by the master. Each boy had one small bowl of soup and no more. The bowls never needed washing because the boys cleaned them with the spoon until they shone.
Okay, wait. Now, after the word Anwen, the next one will be Anwen. There is a time jump, flash forward. Clear? Understood what I'm saying? Now let us flash forward. What happened 9 years later? Clear? So now we come to the age. We come to the age of 9. That now Oliver has grown up and he is now 9 years old. So as he grew up and as he turned 9, he was a pale child. So again, pale because his body is unhealthy or sickly. He is pale and thin. He is sickly, underfed, and undernourished. Okay. He and the other workhouse boys never had enough warm clothes or food. Now, warm clothes are as important as food in European countries like England because the winter is harsher, not like our winter. Warm clothes are very, very important. They were given only 3 meals of thin soup every day. So what they got was very watery. The food was not solid food. It was semi-liquid or watery. And in very small quantity, 3 times a day. Clear? On Sundays, Sunday is considered to be a big day, a holiday. Like people who are from upper class or who have family, they go to a church. They dress up in the morning in their best attires and they go for the church prayer. Clear? Do you have any Christian friend in your class? You ask him that, do you go to church on Sundays? You ask him or her. So in all probability, they will say yes. Okay, if not all Sundays, they go on quite a few Sundays. So Sunday mornings are important. And because Sunday is considered to be a special day, so on Sunday, they would get a small piece of bread as a treat. Are you understanding, Ayan? Underprivileged children, not like you people. They were fed in a big hall. A large pot stood at one end of the room and the soup was served by the master. Each boy had one small bowl of soup and no more. no more, which means once you are done, you cannot ask for a refill. Okay. The bowls never needed cleaning or washing because the boys cleaned them with their spoons until they shone. This line tells us about the pitiable condition in which they lived. They were so hungry that they wouldn't leave a drop behind. The quantity of soup was so less that no child could afford to leave a drop behind. वो चम्मच से उसको scrape करते 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 पूरा एकदम साफ कर देगा. So basically they became so clean that the bowls began to shine. Clear? So this is a very simple story. I'm not teaching you the story. तो तुम खुद भी पढ़ सकते थे. You try to read between the lines. That what does this paragraph indicate? What does this entire page indicate? As we read para by para, you can try to visualize the condition under which they lived and try to connect it to the class difference. That on one hand, you have the rich people and the rich children. On the other hand, you have the orphaned kids, the poor people living in workhouse, struggling to get food, remaining half hungry. Understood? Remember your dialogue when you had gone to zoo? ये एक बार zoo गया था last year. तो zoo में इसको एक reporter ने पकड़ लिया. Okay, Bengali reporter. तो Bengali reporter ने पूछा कि तुम कुछ खाने के लिए लाए हो? टीवी मैंने देखा तो ये बोलता है कि हाँ घर जाके हम ये खाएंगे वो खाएंगे पकोड़ा खाएंगे मीट खाएंगे. ठीक है, तो ये लाविशनेस है तुम लोग के लिए. अब तुम लोग के लिए क्या है कि you are privileged in the sense कि whatever you want to eat, you can tell your family members or parents and they will prepare it for you. And in as much quantity as you want. If you are still hungry, you can still say, और दो तो और मिलेगा. Sometimes you go out and you eat out. And sometimes you get a treat. Like if you want some sweets or ice cream. So point is that you do not have to beg for food. But they had to. And the irony is that even if they begged for food, they would get a slap and not food. Okay. So this is not a story. Oliver Twist is a fictional character. But through this story, Charles Dickens is trying to give us a social, outlook. Or he is giving us a replica of the English society of that era. Okay. And how the divide between the two classes was so immense that the poor people did not even have full meal, did not even have a full meal or a full-time meal. Even the children. And the condition was so problematic that nobody, even the adults, did not feel pity for the child or for the children. So the adults also, because the adults were also poor, they had turned into a hardened, their heart had hardened. Okay. They had become cold-hearted in poverty. When you are poor, then you will become cold-hearted towards your own children. You will tell them कि यही खाना है नसीब में, यही खाना पड़ेगा वरना एक थप्पड़ मारेंगे. So when you are poor, your poverty makes you cold-hearted. This is what has been shown here. Okay. Unnati, read from here. One day Oliver and his friends.
One day Oliver and his friends decided that one boy would walk up to the master after supper and ask for more soup. Oliver was chosen. In the evening, the boy sat down at the tables. The master stood by the pot and the soup was served. It disappeared quickly. The boys whispered and made signs to Oliver. He stood up from the table and went to the master with his bowl and spoon in his hand. Please, sir, he said, I want some more.
Okay, now what happened that one day Oliver and his friends decided that one of us would dare to walk up to the master and ask for more soup. And they elected Oliver. So in the evening when food was served, the moment the soup was served, the soup disappeared. Disappeared means गायब कैसे हुआ? हाँ, everybody सब कोई कूद पड़े उस पे, टूट पड़े, because they were so hungry. Okay, they were like boiling in hunger. They were sort of desperate in hunger. The moment the soup was served, they all pounced at it like a hungry hyena. Okay, and the soup disappeared. Now the boys whispered, shh, 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 ja, ja. So the boys whispered and they made signs to Oliver. So he stood up. Now he stood up gingerly, not confidently. Darte darte. He stood up tentatively from the table and went to the master with his bowl and spoon in his hands. And he dared to say, please, sir, I want some more. Continue.
The master was a fat, healthy man, but he went very pale. He looked with surprise at the small boy. What? Said the master at last in a quiet voice. Please, sir, repeated Oliver, I want some more. The master hit Oliver with his spoon, then seized him and cried for help. Mr. Bumble rushed into the room, and the master told him what Oliver had said. He asked for more. Mr. Bumble cried, I cannot believe it. One day they will hang the boy.
Okay, stop. So the master, look at the first line of page 86. The master was a fat, healthy man. Note this. What is a khata? Okay, because he had power. Try to get this. Master be poor. Hai. It is not that he is rich, but because he has power, he has the power over food. He has the power over food distribution. समझ रहे हो? If we all are poor, but I have the power कि किसको कितना मिलेगा, तो मैं खुद को सबसे ज़्यादा दूंगा. So the master had the power over food, so he kept a large chunk of meal for himself, and he distributed the remainder to the children. So he was a fat, healthy man, but he went very pale. Now here underline pale and write out of anger. He went pale out of anger. Out of anger. Anger and surprise, like, huh? Vari himmat. So he looked with surprise at the small boy. What? Said the master at last in a quiet voice. Now the master is shell-shocked that how can this boy dare to ask me? Please, sir, repeated Oliver, I want some more. Now Oliver realizes that what he is doing can actually bring him, pain and suffering. But Oliver must be so hungry and so hungry and cold and sad that he dared to ask the second time. Then the master hit Oliver with his spoon. So he was holding a spoon maybe, and he hit him and then seized him. Seized means grabbed, pakad lena, and cried for help. Cried means he cried out for help. Somebody come. Then Mr. Bumble, who was the senior authority, he rushed into the room, and the master told Mr. Bumble what Oliver had said. He asked for more. Mr. Bumble cried, I cannot believe it. One day they will hang the boy. Who will hang the boy? They means the authorities. Now there is a board, like board who runs the workhouse. Okay, the authorities. Now they will not literally hang the boy, but they will probably punish him and beat him so severely that it would be as good as hanging. And then he took Oliver away. So please note, Oliver was punished and he took Oliver away and shut him in a dark room. The next morning, a notice appeared on the workhouse gate. £5 were offered to anybody who would take Oliver Twist. So a notice appeared on the workhouse gate, and then means gate के बाहर एक notice hang कर दिया गया that anybody who wants to take him away will be given £5. Understood or not? If I tell you, Devansh, that will you take the boy, I will give you £5. Will you take him? Because you have £5. The reason why you said no is because you don't care for £5. But there are some people, I told you this was a society when those who were poor were very poor, which means a poor person will take him just to get that £5. समझिए? तो जो लास्ट में होगा जो यहाँ मेंशन नहीं किया हुआ है वो है that Oliver Twist will be eventually taken away by the Undertaker because the Undertaker needed that money. Okay, so Oliver was a £5 were offered to anybody who would take Oliver Twist. Okay, Devansh, read the next para loudly. Oliver was a prisoner.
Oliver was a prisoner in that cold, dark room for a whole week. Every morning he was taken outside to wash, and Mr. Bumble beat him with a stick. Then he was taken into the large hall where the boys had their soup. Mr. Bumble beat him in front of everybody. He cried all day. When night came, he tried to sleep, but he was cold, lonely, and frightened.
Okay, wait. So Oliver was a prisoner in that cold room, dark room. So he was imprisoned in a dark and cold room for one complete week. Every morning he was taken outside to wash, and Mr. Bumble beat him with a stick. So every morning he was allowed to use the washroom, but he was beaten with a stick. Then he was taken into the large hall for breakfast. Sorry, not for breakfast. In the large hall where the boys had their soup. And Mr. Bumble beat him in front of everybody. The reason why Mr. Bumble beat him in front of everybody,
So that the other boys, like,
They
they would have the courage to tell
To
them.
set an example.
to set an example, and so that other boys wouldn't dare to, wouldn't even think of making such a
So
request.
they would have the courage.
And he cried all day. So Oliver Twist cried all day. When night came, he tried to sleep, but he was cold. So he was not given any blanket. His clothes were not warm clothes. He was hungry. He was cold. He was lonely, without any guardian, without any parent, and he was frightened also. कि अब मेरा क्या होगा now? What will happen to me? Shall I continue? But
But
One
one
day.
day outside the high working gate, Mr. Bumble met Mr. Sawberry. Mr. Sawberry was tall, thin man who wore black clothes and made coffins. Many of his coffins were for poor people who died in the workhouse. I have prepared the coffins for the 2 women who died last night, he said to Mr. Bumble. Good, said Mr. Bumble. You will be rich one day. Mr. Sawberry, do you know anybody who owns a boy and £5? He raised his stick and pointed to the notice on the roof.
okay. But one day, outside the high workhouse gate, Mr. Bumble met Mr. Sowerberry. Mr. Sowerberry was a tall, thin man who wore black clothes and made coffins. And now usually the undertakers, they wear black clothes because black is the color that people wear during a funeral. Okay. Many of his coffins were for the poor people. You go to YouTube and you will find a player called Undertaker, WWE player. You see, he always wears a black clothes. Clothes are all black. Okay, because his character has been given the image of a real Undertaker. Clear? Unka real name Undertaker nahi, unka real name Mark hai. Mark something. So Undertaker is the screen name. Okay. So many of his coffins were for the poor people, who died in the workhouse. I have prepared the coffins for the two women who died last night, he said to Mr. Bumble. Now, is he referring to Oliver Twist's mother?
No, sir,
Because she did
that
not
is-
die last night. She died 9 years ago. हम तो story flash forward में पढ़ रहे हैं. Good, said Mr. Bumble. You will be rich one day. Now, Mr. Bumble is using a flattering tone and saying that you will be rich one day. Do you know anybody who wants a boy? And 5 pounds. Then he, with his stick, he marks the tap. He taps at the notice board. He raised his stick and he pointed to the notice on the gate. Now, one more object that is the hallmark of a rich person or an aristocratic person is a walking stick.
The tuxes and sticks.
So people would wear a hat.
The tuxes.
टक्सेडो तो पार्टी वेयर है, वो तो कोट जैसा है. हाँ वो भी है, बट
So what they usually wear, sir, why they go?
हाँ वही तो मैंने कहा ना, कोट बोलते हैं उसको. That's a general coat. Those people who belong to a certain gentle class, like Mr. Bumble is a gentleman. Okay, he's an officer, so he would carry a walking stick, not because he's very old. Okay, not because he's very old. Even young people would carry, because walking stick was considered to be a sort of a feature or a characteristic of a gentle person, a person who belongs to a certain class, and a hat and a coat. And he pointed that, do you know somebody who can take away Oliver Twist and also take away 5 pounds, which is a reward? Now the story ends here, which means for class 9 students, the story ends on a note of suspense. Okay, which means the story ends, and as a reader, you will think about the uncertain future of Oliver Twist. You would think that आगे क्या होगा? What would happen to Oliver Twist next? How would he grow up? What would happen once he grows up? What kind of a person would he become? Okay, the story ends on a note of uncertainty. I'll write down a couple of questions as homework. Homework in a copy. If you have a pencil, write in the book. You can write somewhere at the margin or somewhere. Briefly describe, briefly, B-R-I-E-F-L-Y, briefly describe the miserable condition. Briefly describe the miserable condition. Briefly describe the miserable condition of Oliver Twist's mother. Of Oliver Twist's mother. So here we'll talk about her physical condition, that she was very sick, ill, and she died during childbirth. And you will also talk about her background, that she did not have any house, she was homeless, she did not have any money, and she eventually was taken or brought into the workhouse where she died during childbirth. Next question. What compelled Oliver? What compelled, C-O-M-P-E-L-L-E-D, what compelled Oliver to approach, A-P-P-R-O-A-C-H, to approach the master, to approach the master? Question mark. What was the consequence? What was the consequence? C-O-N-S-E-Q-U-E-N-C-E. what was the consequence of his action? What was the consequence of his action? Question mark. So here you will first say that how they were nearly starved and how during a meeting it was decided that Oliver would go and approach him for extra food. In the next paragraph, you will talk about the consequences of his action, which means that how he was beaten, shut inside a dark room, how he was beaten in front of the other children, and eventually how it was announced that he would be given away to somebody else. So you write down at home, you go through the story and prepare these and show it to me next day. I will stop here today.